Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me formally call the House to order. It is 7 p.m. Those of you who have been here in the past are aware that we like to cast off on time, if I may put it that way, to recognize Admiral Dhowan here on the Maritime flavor of the evening. This is a lecture series that we've embarked upon a few years ago, the Habitat Center and the Society for Policy Studies. And at the outset, I'd like to thank the Habitat and its director, Mr. Tandon, for the support that they have provided in sustaining this lecture series, and we are now into year 3. And for today, I'll just be very brief. What I will do is to introduce and welcome our chair and allow him to then take over the rest of the evening. We are going to be discussing this subject today, which is Maritime Asia. And I'm just making this as a caveat. Despite all, the developments that have taken place today, our focus will be on the maritime part of Asia that we're going to discuss. But allow me to introduce and welcome Ambassador Shyam Saran. Most of you know him. He's also been somebody who's supported our effort at sustaining this lecture series. He was one of the first speakers, and subsequently, of course, he's also been helping us to keep this on a certain track and course. He's a very senior and well-known distinguished member of the Foreign Service. He had retired as the Foreign Secretary, and subsequently he was also a special envoy to the Prime Minister. And he's done some very, very, I would say, valuable work in various sectors. I got to know him when he was the Foreign Secretary and subsequently when we were doing the civilian nuclear agreement. Later on, he also became the point person for India in the climate negotiations. And currently, of course, after wearing many hats, he's decided that it would be appropriate for him to become a researcher. So he's now a distinguished fellow at the Center for Policy Research, CPR. He also had a stint as the chairman of the RIS. So, as I said, it's a very, very wide spectrum. And for those of you who may not have seen it, I'm taking the liberty, sir, of drawing your attention to today's business standard, where I would say that inasmuch as I did not want to stray into anything related to Pulwama, I am making this point, just flagging it, that it's one of the most thoughtful pieces about what we as citizens, should be pondering over. But that's just as a brief kind of aside to introduce and welcome Ambassador Shyam Saran. And today, before Admiral Dhowan speaks, he's also very kindly offered to make a gift to the Habitat. So I'll request Ambassador Shyam Saran to. Sir, all yours.
Thank you very much, Uday, for those very kind remarks. I'm very privileged to have this opportunity to chair a session at which one of our most distinguished naval officers will be speaking. I have had occasion to listen to Admiral Dhowan before, and he's a remarkable speaker. His command over his subject is something that I really admire. He has, of course, a very long curriculum vitae, but with his permission, I will shrink this somewhat. He, of course, is our former naval chief, and he's currently the president of the National Maritime Foundation. He has a very, very distinguished career as a naval officer. Even in the very early days, he was marked out as one of the most outstanding and promising young naval officers. And since then, he has been in very, very responsible positions. He was Deputy Chief of Naval Staff. He has commanded the Eastern Fleet as the flag officer commanding the fleet. And he has also, in his tenure as the naval chief, a number of very important decisions were taken with regard to bringing the Indian Navy into what is a very new and challenging area. I'm very happy to note that the Navy in India happens to be one of the services which has paid a lot of attention to strategic issues and the maritime strategic doctrine, or looking at the 21st century, what the challenges would be for India, and how India can really leverage its position as a very important and very powerful naval power. So this is something that Admiral Dhowan has paid a great deal of attention to, and the subject that he will be talking about today, which is about maritime Asia. What are the challenges and opportunities for India, which is emerging as a major power? What role would the maritime dimension play in the emergence of India as a great power? So we are really very, very, very thankful to Admiral Dhowan for accepting the invitation from the Society for Policy Studies in its very successful Changing Asia series. And I was, of course, very privileged to be one of the first speakers in the series. So I would like to compliment the Society for Policy Studies, and particular Commodore Uday Bhaskar, for taking this initiative, and very importantly, to ensure that young people, those who have an interest in international relations, those who want to pursue international relations as a discipline in the future, they have become very much part and parcel of this very laudable initiative. So we should thank Commodore Uday Bhaskar for that. I would also like to recognize the presence of Sumit Tandon, an old friend. But as I was telling him that this is the first occasion that under his Chhatra Chaya, I'm at the Habitat Center to chair one of these events. So thank you, Sumit, for always being very, very helpful and dynamic in the way in which you have been promoting, not just at Habitat now, but in other capacities that you have. Before I ask Admiral Dhowan to speak, he has very, very generously and kindly decided to present a memento from the National Maritime Foundation as its president, as well as a publication of the foundation to Sumit in his capacity as director of the Habitat Center.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Thank you for this wonderful memento. I shall treasure it. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Shyam sir,
Yeah, sure.
I think you should also join us.
Yeah.
if it's not photographed, it hasn't happened. So.
Thank you.
We should find a place for this in the most appropriately named restaurant called The Deck.
Quite right.
And this is 5,000 years of our maritime heritage, sir.
Yeah.
So, which is released by the Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Admiral. Thank you so much.
This was my humble effort to
We'll put it in
record.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Though there is a great deal to talk about in terms of maritime Asia, let me, before inviting Admiral Dhowan, just mention to you that certainly as far as I can see the future, India's emergence as a great power will be very much, anchored, I would say, in its maritime power. And when we talk about maritime power, we should not only talk about naval power, which of course is very important, but maritime power is a much broader concept. Whether India is a leading shipping nation, is it a leading shipbuilding nation, is it a country which has state-of-the-art port facilities? All these go to make a powerful maritime nation. And I think nobody understands this more than someone who has really had the major responsibility of building up India's naval forces, but realizes, I think, how this must be part and parcel of a much broader concept of national power. So, Admiral Dhowan, I know that you have very many insights to offer us. So, without any further delay, may I request our speaker to kindly take the floor. You have the floor, Admiral.
Thank you very much, sir. Ambassador Shyam Saran, sir, Mr. Sunit Tandon, the Director, India Habitat Center, Commodore Uday Bhaskar sir, members of the India Habitat Center, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a distinct honor for me to be present here today at the India Habitat Center and to share my thoughts with this august audience on a maritime subject where the waters of maritime Asia have emerged as the world's economic and strategic center of gravity in the maritime today. And this maritime domain, we also have India, and I'll be talking about the challenges and opportunities for India as a resurgent maritime nation. The subject of the oceans and the seas is what we are going to talk about. And that has enthused all of us, like me, like Commodore Bhaskar, and somebody else who's worn and donned the white uniform. But I would like to tell you that the subject is of equal interest to all of you as well, because we are all tied and connected to the oceans. And I would like all of you to reflect on an interesting biological fact, that we all have in our veins the same percentage of salt in our blood, which is the exact same percentage of salt in the oceans. And this is true, not only about the salt in our blood, but also the salt in our sweat and in our tears. We are all therefore tied and connected to the oceans. And whenever we go back to the seas, whether to sail on them or merely watch them, we get the feeling of going back where we came from. This truly defines the relationship of humankind with the oceans, and perhaps also the reason why talking about the seas brings out such passion in us. India is essentially a maritime nation, and the Indian seaboard has been the vortex of intense maritime activity over centuries. The Indus Valley civilization, which existed in the western part of the country, dates back to 3300 BC. And even today, we have a dry dock at Lothal in Gujarat, which dates back to 2200 BC. It is from these small ports that the ancient mariners sailed out to distant lands in Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, and east coast of Africa. On the east coast of India and in the southern part of the country, we had the seafaring kingdoms of the Kalingas, the Cholas, the Pandyas, and Cheras, who sailed out to Southeast Asian countries. And even today, we can see glimpses of India's glorious heritage in all these countries. Till about the 15th century, India was the richest country in the world with the largest GDP, closely followed by China. And together, we had nearly 50% of the world's wealth. But then, because of the neglect of the oceans and the seas, we lost our supremacy of the seas with the arrival of the European powers, and the first to arrive was the Portuguese sailor Vasco da Gama, who landed on the shores of Calicut on 20th of May, 1498. The Portuguese were followed by the Dutch, the British, and the French. What is not very well known is that the British period was also a period of glorious warship building in this country. When the Britishers arrived, they found a unique combination between the Malabar teak and the shipbuilders of Gujarat. And they started building ships in what was called Bombay Docks then. Commencing 1753, about 144 merchant ships, about 115 war vessels, including 84 gunships for the Royal Navy, were built in India in Bombay Docks. Some of the most famous ships in the world were built during that period. The oldest warship afloat in the world today is HMS Trincomalee, which is still berthed in Hartlepool in UK, built in 1817, 200 years ago in Bombay docks. The national anthem of United States of America, the Star-Spangled Banner, was written by Francis Key in Baltimore on board a ship, HMS Minden. And that ship, HMS Minden, ladies and gentlemen, was built in India. The Treaty of Nanking, ceding Hong Kong to the British, was signed on board another famous warship on 29th of August, 1842. And that ship was HMS Cornwallis, also built in India. Regrettably, when the transition took place from sail to steam and wood to steel, India got left behind because we were then not part of the Industrial Revolution, and the revival of our maritime capabilities took place post-independence in the latter half of the 20th century. Our blue planet, the Earth, has a dominance of the maritime domain, with over 70% of the Earth's surface covered by water, nearly 80% of the world's population living within 200 nautical miles of the coast, and 90% of the world's trade transiting by sea. Oceans are central to life on Earth. They are rich in oil and mineral resources. They are the suppliers of oxygen, the absorbers of carbon dioxide, a virtual heat sink, rich in biodiversity, which have emerged as global economic highways for transit of seaborne trade. With depletion of resources on land, humankind has turned towards the seas for resources, and there is a misperception that the oceans are an unending resource base and an infinite sink. Nothing could be further away from reality. Over the past few decades, we have witnessed indiscriminate pollution of the seas and contamination of the natural marine habitat, resulting in a detrimental impact of climate change on the oceans. Studies have indicated that nearly 80% of all pollutants in the oceans emanate from land. And if the current rate of pollution continues, in a few decades from now, we will have more plastic in the ocean than fish. The concept of blue economy has emerged as a new paradigm, and I would like to define harnessing the blue economy as the economic development of all our maritime interests by optimal and efficient utilization of resources, with minimum impact on the environment, and ensuring sustainable development of the oceans. Today, India sits astride busy sea lines of communication that transit across the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean is the third largest water body, spanning an area of 68.5 million square kilometers, and countries on the rim of the Indian Ocean are home to nearly 1/3 of humanity. About 120,000 ships transit the Indian Ocean every year, carrying 66% of the world's oil, 50% of the world's container traffic, and 33% of the world's cargo traffic. 1 billion tons of oil transit the Indian Ocean, and these oil arteries and trade routes lead further east to the ASEAN and countries like Japan, South Korea, and China. 95% of India's trade transits by sea, and this accounts for nearly 30% of the country's GDP. As a maritime nation, we have a long coastline of 7,516 kilometers and an exclusive economic zone of over 2 million square kilometers. In recent years, under the leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister, there have been a series of initiatives for sustainable development in the maritime domain. The Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, has linked the blue chakra on our national flag with our potential to harness the blue economy, and also outlined his vision for the Indian Ocean as SAGAR, which means the oceans, and the acronym stands for Security and Growth for All in the region. I will now highlight some of the maritime sectors in India, which are also aspects of our maritime power, which are likely to witness significant growth in the coming years. The first is the port infrastructure development sector. India has 12 major ports and over 200 non-major ports. The port handling capacity of nearly 1,500 million metric tons per annum is likely to increase to 2,500 million metric tons per annum just in the next 10 years. The government has launched the ambitious Sagarmala project, which is a port-led development initiative based on 4 pillars of port modernization, connectivity, port-led industrialization, and coastal community development. Sagarmala actually comprises over 500 projects with an envisaged investment of nearly $100 billion US. It envisages development of transshipment hubs, development of greenfield infrastructure projects with minimum impact on the environment, connectivity between our major and minor ports and the hinterland through multimodal rail and road connectivity and development of inland waterways. India has approximately 14,500 kilometers of navigable inland waterways, and in the first phase, the government is developing 4,500 kilometers as 5 major national waterways. National Waterway 1, you may be aware, is connecting the port of Haldia right up to Allahabad across the Ganges River. National Waterway 2 is in the northeastern part of the country on the Brahmaputra River. National Waterway 3 in the coastal state of Kerala. National Waterway 4 in Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. And National Waterway 5 in the state of Orissa. Currently, 94% of freight in India moves by road or rail. The development of inland waterways will ensure that we will have a much larger percentage of transportation over water, both through the inland waterways as well as through enhancement of coastal shipping, because transportation over water is cheaper, safer, and cleaner. India has a large shipping industry with about 1,390 Indian flag ships. And while 95% of our trade by volume transits by sea, only 7% is carried in Indian hulls. The government has given a major impetus towards registering more ships under the Indian flag to increase the tonnage of Indian-controlled shipping, and also to provide a boost to the Indian shipbuilding industry, because 80% of our oil requirements, 40% of our gas requirements are met by import, which is largely by sea. And if crude oil is our greatest import, petroleum products are also one of our greatest exports. India has a vibrant shipbuilding industry with over 27 shipyards, and the government has given a major boost to the shipbuilding industry by according it the special infrastructure status and also permitting 100% foreign direct investment into shipbuilding. Our endeavor will be to have a long-term shipbuilding plan for the nation, maybe a 30-year shipbuilding plan, where we take into account the entire spectrum of ships that need to be built, from the large VLCC carriers, the LNG carriers, to the container ships of above 10,000 TEUs, the coastal shipping ships, and even to build in the deep-sea fishing trawlers, and those ships which will ply in the inland waterways. So it's a huge requirement to build ships in India, but we will have to endeavor to see that these are built in accordance with the Energy Efficiency Design Index as approved by the IMO and also to see that ships of the future are propelled by environment-friendly fuel. An area I would like to specifically mention is that about warship building in this country. I mentioned to you about warship building during the British period. But soon after independence, the Navy prepared its first perspective plan in 1948, 1 year after independence, and it envisaged indigenous shipbuilding. We inducted naval architects into the Navy in 1955. Independent India built its first naval war vessel in 1961, the patrol vessel Ajay, at the Garden Reach shipyard in Kolkata. And we set up our Naval Design Directorate in 1964. For over 50 years now, our naval designers have been designing, and our indigenous shipyards have been building ships for the Indian Navy, resulting in our transformation from a buyer's Navy to a builder's Navy. Today, it's a matter of great pride for every Indian that all the 40 ships and submarines being constructed for the Indian Navy are being built in Indian shipyards, both public and private. And these range from aircraft carriers, frigates, destroyers, down to submarines. This is one of the finest examples I can think of a Make in India initiative. India has over 1,300 islands and islets. As part of the Andaman and Nicobar group in the Bay of Bengal, the Lakshadweep group in the Arabian Sea and islands off the west and east coast of India. The government has prepared a comprehensive island development plan taking into account aspects of security, economic sustenance, environment preservation, and social and cultural sustenance. The aim is to have greenfield infrastructure projects with minimum impact on the environment, to promote controlled ecotourism, and to promote cruise tourism. Development of port infrastructure in the islands will also enhance our connectivity with our littoral neighbors in the Bay of Bengal, which is the largest bay in the world, and we have 7 countries located on the rim of that bay. The other areas which will witness growth include the offshore oil and gas exploration, deep seabed mining, and renewable sources of ocean energy, such as the offshore wind energy, the wave and tidal energy, and ocean thermal energy conversion, which is quite an interesting concept because the waters around the Andaman and Nicobar Islands have a surface temperature of about 24 degrees centigrade, and the water at the depth of about 1,000 meters is at 4 or 5 degrees centigrade. When we pull out and pump water from those depths, we get a temperature differential of about 20 degrees centigrade. And this is used to evaporate ammonia, run turbines, and generate power. A part of this is also utilized to convert seawater into fresh water, which is an ideal situation for the islands. And also, the water is so well oxygenated that if we were to use it for shrimp farming, the produce would be more than double. Another major area is that we have a thriving fishing industry. We have 250,000 fishing boats, 4 million active fishermen, 14 million who are part of the fishing community, and our annual produce is in the region of 11.41 million metric tons, which makes us the 3rd largest fish-producing nation in the world. But this is only scratching the surface, because 90% of fishing in Indian waters is restricted to our coastal areas, whereas we have the entire 200 nautical miles of the EEZ to be exploited. There is hardly any fishing in our deep waters, and it is said that fish in Indian deep waters are perhaps dying of old age. The government has promulgated the National Fisheries Policy in 2017, and that will provide a major impetus for sustained deep-sea fishing in Indian waters. It can therefore be seen that we have an ocean of opportunities to harness the blue economy. The challenge, however, is to ensure that this is in accordance with the Sustainable Development Goals. As you're aware, the United Nations has promulgated the document Transforming Our World 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 14, which relates to preservation of oceans, seas, and resources. Apart from our economic development of our maritime interests, India has also made its submission to the United Nations High-Level Political Forum on its voluntary report on the Sustainable Development Goals. While all this is a good feature in terms of harnessing the blue economy, we must understand that the seas are no longer a benign medium, and globalization has resulted in vulnerability of the oceans. The threats and challenges on the waters of maritime Asia are as wide and varied as they come. Who could have imagined that in the 21st century, we would once again be grappling with pirates, or that the major threat in the maritime domain would be from asymmetric warfare and maritime terrorism? But that is a reality today, and the other threats and challenges include arms smuggling, drugs trafficking, human trafficking, and poaching. Another challenge on the waters of maritime Asia is that indiscriminate pollution of the seas have resulted in a detrimental impact of climate change on the oceans. Consequently, a large percentage of extreme climate conditions turn into natural disasters, and this places the waters of maritime Asia virtually in the eye of the storm, and our navies and coast guards have to be ready to provide humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. The instabilities and turbulence in some parts of Asia and the Indian Ocean region have the potential to spill over into the maritime domain, and the situation can best be described as fragile. Consequently, over 120 warships from more than 20 navies are always present in the Indian Ocean region to safeguard their maritime interests. The Indian Navy has emerged as a multi-dimensional network force which is ready to take on any challenge in the waters of the Indian Ocean and beyond. And it performs its missions in accordance with 4 basic classical roles. And these are the military role, the constabulary role, the benign role, and the diplomatic role. Under the military role, the Navy is continuously exercising and honing the professional skills to prepare for war and to meet any challenge in the maritime domain of its primary area of interest, the Indian Ocean region, and beyond. In the constabulary role, the Indian Navy ensures coastal and offshore security in coordination with the Coast Guard and other maritime agencies operating in the maritime domain. The ships of the Indian Navy are deployed in the Gulf of Aden since 2008, 24/7 for anti-piracy patrols. Our ships and aircraft also carry out EEZ surveillance in the waters of our littoral neighbors, such as Seychelles, Mauritius, Maldives. Coordinated patrols are there with Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia, and we actually ensure that our seafarers, our sailors, spend sleepless nights at sea so that the citizens of India can sleep in peace. Under the benign role, the Indian Navy ensures humanitarian assistance and disaster relief to not only our own citizens, but even to our littoral neighbors in the event of natural disasters such as the tsunami, as well as crises such as the Yemen crisis, which took place in 2015, and the ships of the Indian Navy were used to evacuate more than 3,000 people, women and children, from over 30 countries to safety. And this indicated the unique brotherhood of the seas to help other people who are in humanitarian crisis and distress. Moving on to the diplomatic role, the Indian Navy shows its flag across the oceans of the world and carries out exercises with other navies of the world. We also carry out maritime cooperation to enhance the interoperability between various navies. The Indian Navy took also a unique initiative way back in 2008, which was the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, as a maritime construct to promote cooperation between the navies of the Indian Ocean region. We also have another organization, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, which was established in 1997 as a socio-economic construct, but around 2012, we had maritime safety and security added to the agenda as a focus area for the IORA, and today is an important structure in the Indian Ocean region. To further promote cooperation among the navies of the world, the Indian Navy conducted the International Fleet Review at Visakhapatnam in February 2016. 50 navies of the world came together to strengthen bridges of friendship. And the underlying theme of the International Fleet Review was that we may be separated by geography, but we are certainly united through oceans. The waters of the Maritime Asia and the Indian Ocean have emerged as global economic highways. And another unique feature of the Indian Ocean is that 80% of the oil and trade that emanates in the Indian Ocean region is extra-regional in nature. This implies that if there is any impediment to the free flow of oil or trade, it would have a detrimental impact, not just on the economies of the region, but the global economies as well. Safety, security, and stability on the waters of Maritime Asia is therefore of paramount importance, and global maritime partnerships and networking between navies is therefore a necessity in the coming decade. It would be evident by now that India has vast maritime interests, and the responsibility of protecting these interests falls squarely on the shoulders of men in white uniform, because it is the responsibility of the Indian Navy to ensure that our maritime interests, which have a vital relationship with the nation's economic growth, are allowed to develop unhindered, both in peace and war. In conclusion, I would like to highlight 5 major takeaways. The United Nations document Transforming Our World 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 14, provide a template for conservation of oceans, seas, and resources. We now need to prepare a comprehensive plan for sustainable development in different avenues of the maritime sector to ensure sustainable growth in these sectors. There is a need to draw up a national level maritime policy to ensure the economic development of all our maritime interests in coordination and in sync with the initiatives for the blue economy. There is a need for an apex-level organization to coordinate and integrate the activities and initiatives of a large number of agencies which operate in the maritime domain. And this would ensure that we could emerge as a resurgent maritime nation. in order to fully implement the vision of our Honorable Prime Minister of Sagar, which is security and growth for all in the region, we need to draw up a comprehensive maritime cooperation roadmap with all the littoral neighbors in the Indian Ocean region to shape a favorable maritime environment in the region. The Honorable Prime Minister has launched a dynamic initiative of Swachh Bharat. We need to extend this concept to Swachh Sagar to ensure clean and healthy oceans for our future generations, which are a common heritage of mankind. The seas around us are gaining newfound importance as each day goes by because of their linkages with the blue economy, and I have no doubt that the current century is the century of the seas. The large number of initiatives being undertaken in the maritime domain are a pointer to indicate that India has once again turned towards the seas and is destined to emerge as a resurgent maritime nation. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Admiral Dhowan, for what all of us would agree has been really an outstanding presentation from someone who really understands the oceans and has had the opportunity to really lead India to become a very important maritime nation. What was particularly interesting about his presentation was how he brought together not only the aspect what I was mentioning in my opening remarks, that India is not just a naval power, but it should look upon itself as a maritime power. And I was very happy to hear Admiral Dhowan that he looked at this whole issue in such a comprehensive manner. And it's also perhaps very encouraging to note from the various initiatives that Admiral Dhowan has mentioned that very important and significant steps are being taken to really bring India to the forefront of maritime nations in the world. Because as he said, and from the history that he mentioned, before India became colonized, how the maritime power was really such a critical component of India's, place as one of the most important and richest countries in the world. So there is no doubt that the maritime dimension is really something which is indispensable if we are looking at the future of India. So thank you, Admiral Dhowan, for those very, very insightful and perceptive remarks. We have about 15 minutes or so for questions and answers. And what I would request is that whoever would like to raise a question, and please raise questions rather than comments. Please identify yourself and state your question. And what I would request, Admiral, is that maybe we can take a series of 3 questions together, and then perhaps you could you could respond. You wanted to say something?
Okay.
Yeah.
This is Uday Bhaskar, and Admiral Dhowan, I'd like to commend you, sir, for an outstanding lecture. I've heard many lectures on the maritime domain, and I think today would be definitely on top of the list of lectures we've heard, so allow me to commend you. I have a question, sir, which is that from what you said in your takeaways, to me it appears, because one of the things that we try to do here is to also tease out policy relevant issues, because that's the whole idea of this series of lectures. So the question that comes to my mind is, logic would suggest that India needs the equivalent of a maritime advisor. I'm not suggesting a maritime security advisor, because that gets into the NSA's domain, and that's not my intent. The NSA has a broad spectrum responsibility. But for all the other areas that you touched upon, including the blue economy, logic would suggest a maritime advisor. So the specific query is, from Prime Minister Vajpayee's time, when we had Sagar Mala to where we are now to Sagar, is there any thinking about the maritime advisor, and what is the constraint? You know, we've spoken about many of the constraints of the great octopus that the government of India is, but you know, you're sitting next to an envoy to the Prime Minister, so you might tell us about it.
Yes, please. I'll come to you.
Good evening, Admiral Dhowan and Ambassador Sharan. Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask that with the increasing threat of global warming, it is expected that in next few years or maybe decades, the Arctic Ocean would become completely navigable, at least during the summers. And with this expectation, there are many countries who have started to lay stake or lay claims over the probably expected to be resource-rich area of the Arctic Ocean. So, what should be India's stand given this future scenario which is building up, and what all capabilities do we need to add to our arsenal to be able to deal with that, both from a security strategic perspective and from a trade economic development perspective? Thank you.
Please, I will come in the second round. Yes, please.
Good evening, sir. My name is Rajiv Patel. I'm a baby in the field of security. Like from a civil engineer to a computer scientist, looking after cyber security in the government. But sir, my question is, during this period of the Pulwama attack, I think most of us actually missed out a news item in which India ordered, or India is going to build about 6 submarines for a total of about 40,000 crores, sir. So my question to you is, sir, how much times our naval power will increase with this induction of these submarines, sir?
Commodore Bhaskar asked the very relevant question about the policy and the need for a maritime advisor. Well, it is something which has been under consideration for, as far as I know, for about 15 years. And it has taken different forms, from maritime security advisor to maritime advisor, etc. Firstly, I would say that there is a need for, as I mentioned, an apex level organization. Why is it necessary? It is necessary because today we have about 15 ministries and 20 agencies operating in the maritime domain. And there is a need for coordination and integration. It is not an issue of turf here. It is the question of coordination and integration. Let me just give an example of, what do we mean by this coordination and integration? Individual ministries are there. You have the shipping ministry, you have the shipbuilding area being looked after, you have the fishing. I mentioned that our fishing is largely restricted to our coastal areas, where we have the entire 200 nautical miles of our exclusive economic zone to be exploited. Why don't we fish in our deep waters? It couldn't be just a thought of mine. We don't fish in our deep waters because we don't have deep sea fishing trawlers. Why don't we have deep sea fishing trawlers? Well, that's a question, because a country which can make aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines can surely make deep sea fishing trawlers. Now, if you fish in territorial waters up to 12 nautical miles, that fisherman is a state subject. He's looked after by Kerala, Karnataka, or Tamil Nadu, gets his subsidies from there. The moment he wants to fish in deeper waters beyond the 12 nautical miles, as you're aware, that becomes, though within our EEZ, but is still the high seas, and now he is under the jurisdiction of Ministry of Agriculture. Since we don't make any deep sea fishing trawlers, he has to import the trawler. The moment he imports the trawlers, it's logical that there would be at least 1 or 2 crew which will be foreign-born crew. The moment that situation arises, now this fisherman or whoever is operating this trawler has to take the approval from Ministry of Home. So the fisherman says that, thank you very much, I'll go out in the morning, come back in the evening, fish in coastal areas, overfish actually. Our coastal areas are overfished. So these are the kind of policy integration that are required. Now, in what I've stated, there are about 5 ministries at least involved in this. Because you have the shipping for the shipbuilding, you have the Ministry of Agriculture, you have the various Department of Fisheries, you have the clearances which will be required from defense, you need the environment clearances which are required, and so on. It is to integrate and coordinate, and this is just one example. There are so many issues related to that. Do we even know that our exclusive economic zone is 2.02 million square kilometers? India made its submission to the Commission on the Continental Shelf, limits of the continental shelf, way back in 2009. And that was a partial submission. The second submission, which was due, is still to be made. What is the impact of that? What is the submission that we have made to this commission? The submission that we have made to this commission is that because of the laws of the sea, and by the extension of the continental shelf, this 2.02 million square kilometers can expand to 3.2 million square kilometers. We are talking of 1.2 million square kilometers more, which can then become the exclusive economic zone of India. What is the significance? The significance is, if and when that happens, we will have 2 manifestations of India. A continental manifestation on land with an area of 3.2 million square kilometers, and a maritime manifestation at sea of 3.2 million square. Why aren't we doing it? Because who is to steer this? This is steered by the MEA. And is the MEA the stakeholder for the EEZ? Not really. It may be the other ministries of hydrocarbons, oil and natural gas, the fisheries, or shipping. There is some lack of coordination and integration. And this is what has been projected. I can only share this much, that we've been working on something like a national maritime policy. Niti Aayog is involved. Suggestions have been made. Whether it'll be a council, whether it'll be a commission, whatever it'll be, the aim will be that we need an apex level organization to certainly look into this. So it is not whether we need it or not, it is when it will happen, and that's for the government to decide. You mentioned the issue about global warming and the Arctic and the Northern Passage, which will open up. Firstly, of course, India's interest is definitely there, and India is there as an observer, both in Arctic, and you must also remember that Antarctic is very important for us as well, because of the changes of weather, because of prediction of monsoons. And the monsoons are very important for us, so the waves, currents. So both Arctic and Antarctic are important, and we monitor them closely. India is involved. But just to get an understanding of what the Northern Passage is all about, it is actually an area which is not very conducive to sea transportation, not just because it is frozen. We are now mentioning that, because of the global warming, the passage will open up. If you were to be there in the Northern Passage in the Arctic Ocean and sailing in the month of November or December, it would be pitch dark for 24 hours. That means there is no sunlight at all any time of the day. If you were to go there a month later in December or January, it will still be pitch dark. And the seas are not very kind there. The weather is quite bad. The other aspect is that though it is full of oil and mineral resources, to actually harness those are not easy and not very cheap either. And if I remember the correct estimate, only if the oil is above $80 a barrel, $70 to $80 a barrel, would the oil from the North Sea become viable? Because the cost of taking out the oil and the other expenses are high. Notwithstanding that, there is a lot of interest, because the opening up of that passage certainly reduces the area for transit. And one of the countries which has taken very, very keen interest and actually made good inroads is China. China has actually gone overboard in getting the double-hulled ships, the kind of ships that need to transit through the Arctic Ocean. It is getting a port ready very close to the eastern extremity from where it can do the passage. And there are other countries around the Arctic Ocean which are getting into it. So, in short, it is important area, certainly with global warming, which is not a very good thing to happen. We will lose the ice cover, and that will have many, many other impacts down the line. But certainly it will open up the Northern Passage, and we should be ready. For us, our transit and trade in terms of a route that may not be so economical and viable, because even our oil resources and other things come from different parts of the world, right from South America to Vladivostok, but it's the Indian Ocean transit area that we use. But certainly it's an important area to watch out for in terms of the opening up of the Northern Passage, in terms of the mineral resources, in terms of the conflict that is going to be there for space, and to put in your bid that you want to be part of the Arctic Ocean. You mentioned about the capabilities of the Indian Navy in terms of the submarine force. As I mentioned, the Indian Navy's blueprint for a future Indian Navy is firmly anchored on self-reliance and indigenization. You're aware that we are already making our own submarines. 6 of these are under construction at the Mazagon docks. You're also aware that India makes its own nuclear submarines. What you are mentioning about is the next lot of the submarines, the conventional submarines, a project called the 75 India, which is now, after a gap, if I can call it that, has been agreed to by the government as an acceptance of necessity under the Strategic Partnership Project, which will get the private players involved, as well as collaboration with another country, so that there will be issues related to transfer of technology, and these submarines will definitely be built in India. Certainly, acquiring submarine force is completing the underwater dimension. It's a very, very important part of our force levels. This is going to be in accordance with the Navy's 15-year maritime capability perspective plan. So will certainly be of great importance, both to enhance our force levels, and also the fact that these submarines will also be constructed in India, and the level of technology transfer will move from know-how to know-why. So that is the important part of these submarines.
Yeah, thank you. We have time, I think, just for one last question. So let me give the floor to you. I'm sorry, but I have been told that 8 o'clock we cannot go.
Very briefly, sir. Thank you, Admiral. You've taken us to a Admiral, you've taken us to a higher level of thinking. So, 2 supplementary questions. Very fast. A gentleman asked you about the Arctic Ocean. I'm not worried, I'm too old. It's the question to both of you. Do you think in the next 20 years the importance that the Indian Ocean holds will reduce with the distance from Japan, northern China, Russia, reducing by 2,100 kilometers to Europe? The second supplementary question, since you took us to a great height, Pakistan already submitted its continental claim. The water of Pakistan, Karachi, is, as we all mariners and you, navigator, know better, we have got a very shallow continental shelf. They have a deep continental shelf, like Visakhapatnam. Their award has already been given. And I'm not sure whether Foreign Secretary, ex-Foreign Secretary, PMO, have submitted a claim yet. Pakistan was number 13 to submit its claim, and I can tell you with confidence, sir, you probably know more about it. China helped both Bangladesh to put its claim for the border with India, international border, and China. They have got outstanding maritime experts and a whole university. I don't think our Department of Ocean, which is now Earth Sciences, has any expertise on the maritime law. We lost the Marines case. We made a mess of armed Ohio. So why has the Navy not pushed that you and Coast Guard know more about maritime law than the Ocean Earth Sciences?
Okay. two questions that you made. One was, of course, the Arctic Ocean. Whatever the Northern Passage may or may not do, and as I said, you're a navigator, sir. You know how difficult it is to navigate in those parts. And of course, it will reduce the distance when you look at that. But the importance of the Indian Ocean is only going to increase. Even with all the efforts that China has made in terms of pipelines, etc., and through the Myanmar, through various aspects, at this point in time, it exports nearly 80 to 90% of its oil requirements, and that is only going to reduce by a meager 10%. Trade is going to increase. 90,000 ships used to transit. It's today 120,000 ships. The percentage of oil trade and containers I mentioned to you, this is going to be the hub for more than one reasons. And also because the vulnerabilities, of whether it's Japan, whether it's China, are all here in the Indian Ocean region, and that is why all the navies and the countries are making a stake. So the importance of the Indian Ocean region is actually going to increase. Much as Mahan had said, it will be, it'll be the keys to the seven seas in the 21st century, and that's the reality today. With regard to your the issue about the claims, as I mentioned, India had made its partial submission in 2009. I would just like to reassure you that, sir, the professionalism is in very safe hands. As you're aware, the National Hydrographic Office is closely involved with giving all the professional inputs, not just for the continental shelf claim. We have helped also, as other countries, for Mauritius and Seychelles to submit their claims. We know how to submit the claims. Our main issues are in the Bay of Bengal, actually, as part of the Bengal fan, which is the largest deep sea fan in the world. And there is a lot at stake. So it's an issue of making sure that it is correctly done, it is professionally done, so that as and when our final submission is made, I'm not denying the fact that I also feel that it's been delayed, should have been made earlier, but it's a question of prioritization. But I don't think there is anything to worry on the lack of professionalism among the various agencies, right from the Naval Hydrographic Office or from the Ministry of Earth Sciences. You're aware, even with deep seabed mining, India has the pioneer status with an area allocated in deep sea Indian Ocean of 150,000 square kilometers. And we've finished with our surveys of that and now into the next phase. So things are happening. The only thing about the seas is that it's beyond what we can see. So it's not very apparent compared to what we may see in terms of firing on land. So I think it's not to despair. India is well on its way to emerge as a resurgent maritime nation.
Thank you very much, Admiral Dhowan. That has been really most out. I think you would have noticed that the Admiral spoke for nearly half an hour, 40 minutes, not looking at even a single note. That's quite remarkable, isn't it? So I must compliment you, Admiral. This is really quite something. Although we are a little over time, but I would still ask Commodore Uday Bhaskar to say a few closing.
No, it just remains for me to thank everyone and share something that I can as a sailor, that when Robin Dhowan was a young officer in the Navy, it used to be said that he had the memory of an elephant. So there we are, now we know he didn't have to look at any paper, but that's on a lighter vein. I just want to thank Ambassador Shyam Saran for steering the session, Admiral Dhowan for this excellent lecture he gave us, and to make two Adam announcements, if I may. One is all of you are invited to the next lecture in the series, which is on the 11th of March. It's a Monday. So if you are not already on the mailing list of the Habitat or the SPS, we have two of our reps. There's Lakshmi, if you raise your hand there, and Sachin. So please leave your cards or your email IDs. But remember, once you get onto our list, you can't get off. So you will keep getting invites, as and when. That's number one. Second is we have a sprinkling of young people here, both professionals and young students from universities and colleges. So as always, you are encouraged to file 700 words on Admiral Dhowan's lecture. You can agree with him, you can disagree with him. So we want both reportage and analysis. Please, you can mail it like you did last time to Lakshmi or to Sachin, and those that make the cut, we'll publish them. Thank you very much. So on that note,
Yeah.
Shyam sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I would like to also acknowledge the presence of Mrs. Dhowan in our midst. It's very, very big privilege for us to have you with us as well. Thank you. Thank you, Admiral.
It was excellent, Robin.